Welcome, everybody, to 20 Years in the Making of Adventure Pack Rafting with myself, James Q. Martin, the director of a new film we're proud to show here at Wild and Scenic called Sheri. And I am joined with Thor Tingey, Sheri's son, to discuss some adventures in the making of the company and this film. Before we get going with our discussion here, we thought we'd show you a little clip from the film. Here we go.
"21 years later, and almost within a day or two, 21 years later, back in the same spot. This is kind of, in a way, where it started. In the summer of 2000, we spent 39 days in the backcountry, and we drew a line going up river valleys, over passes, down river valleys, all the way through the Brooks Range. That was close to 700 miles. Hypothermia was a daily occurrence for us. We had no PFDs, no dry suits, no nothing, just us sitting in the pack rafts in icy water. But we were 22 years old, and that's just how we did it. Our rule of thumb, which people might think is dangerous now, was paddle until one of us started slurring our speech. And that was the cue to the rest of us that somebody has reached the point of hypothermia where they can't really talk straight anymore. When I got done with the trip, I was like, I love this idea of pack rafting. I love this idea of landscape travel, point A to point B, big Alaska, see everything. But I can't do it with these boats. It's just not practical. I don't want to be that cold. I don't want to deal with gear failure all the time. And so my mom jumps in and she's like, I would love to help make a boat.
All right, Thor. Well, now that we got a little taste of the film and some of the epic adventure you went on, can you tell me more, like a little more detail about that adventure that you guys did there?
Yeah, sure. So it kind of started as me being a college kid and having a grant program to go do like a 2-week wilderness adventure, which is a pretty cool program. But even though I grew up in Alaska wilderness and all that stuff, I didn't really know what to do. And I got introduced to Roman Dial, who's a well-known kind of Alaska adventurer, college professor. And he told me, this is in 1997, I believe, Christmas time, you got to try pack rafting. That's like the way to get around in Alaska. And I didn't know anything about it. Very few people did it at that time. But he says, you got to try pack rafting. And he kind of set me up with a route in the Alaska range that was about 200 miles long. And my friends and we got a grant for that and did this route. And it was totally awesome. We had a great time, but it was definitely like the pack rafting element, the floating down the river element was also a lot of suffering, being cold, having boats that didn't work. And then 2 years later, we kind of were back for more punishment, and we did put together a trip in the Brooks Range that was 700 miles, 40 days, something, that was pretty ambitious for that era and kind of who we were, 22-year-old kids. But the trip happened. We made it happen. We walked from the Arctic Refuge all the way to the village of Kobuk, pack rafted a whole bunch along the way. But so that really kind of like wired in the concept for me of that this landscape travel in Alaska, you need a boat to do it, need a boat that you can backpack with. And that's kind of a pack raft. But back then there really wasn't a boat commercially available that would do those kinds of trips. You kind of had to just use what was available, which is kind of cheap vinyl, lightweight boats that you get from a big box store.
Right. It's funny as I think back, I also grew up in Alaska, as you know, and I think back to some of the things that we were trying and some of my friends were trying. I mean, we were just using like, a little pool toy, basically, was what you guys were using, which is damn near gonna kill you. In so many words, I guess one question I had is, how would you define pack rafting? Like, what is pack rafting?
for me, like pack rafting in the core way we think about it, not what it's grown into, but the original form is very much the idea of a boat that will, an inflatable boat that'll fit in a backpack so that when you're traversing from point A to point B, you can cross land by carrying everything on your back, and you can cross water by floating in a little raft. And that's what the purpose of a pack raft is, to do those kinds of trips.
So you come back from this trip and you guys managed to pull off something pretty incredible, having been up there in Alaska with you and also have experienced the realities of the Kobuk River, and what it is like to travel months in the Brooks Range. It's pretty radical, although the Brooks is definitely, as far as it's not as gnarly as the Alaska Range as far as weather, etc. But with that being said, you come back from this trip and you have this idea and you present it to your mother. And can you tell me a little bit about that idea and what you and Sheri started to come up with?
Yeah, so Sheri, it wasn't just a situation where I came back from these trips and was like, Mom, make me a pack raft. She was much more involved in that from the beginning. When I went on my first pack raft trip in the Alaska Range, even, she looked at the boats that we had, and I hope people see this in the film. She always wants her fingers in anything related to fabric. She wants to design and make something better. And so though we were using these cheap vinyl pool toy boats, she was helping us glue fabric onto the bottom or nylon onto the bottom to help them be a little more durable and stuff like that. So even at that point, I think she was actively looking at this product and saying, this thing's not very good. It's not very durable for what you guys want to do with it. And so when I got back from the trip, it was as much me saying, I really want to do this, but I don't have a good enough product, as her saying, hey, that's a really cool thing that you just did. And I saw what you used and I can make a better one. So there was kind of more two of us coming together rather than me saying, Mom, make me a boat. But when it actually came to making that first boat, it was a lot of collaboration, because she's the fabric genius designer that comes up with how to make it. But she was asking me, well, what do you want the boat to do? And so I was much more very focused on what the boats kind of lacked at that time. And that was larger diameter tubes so that it would float higher, and a rocker in the bow so that waves wouldn't just crash over the bow and fill the boat with water. And then obviously a much more durable material. And that's really, if you look at the first alpacas that came out, that's the core of what they were: bigger volume tubes, more durable materials, rocker in the bow to allow you to go up and over little waves so that the boat doesn't get as wet.
Yeah, and those first boats, like, kind of giving a little insight into the film and some of what I know from your guys' story, that very first boat was made from a shower curtain, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, so Mom loves to design, and just simple, cheap material that she can manipulate and then get a sense of shape and then work from there. So rather than cutting up your expensive nylon, which itself, you won't even really see the shape of it that well until you've actually made a boat, you can take something really light, like shower curtain weight, like a clear vinyl shower curtain. You can cut it up and you can put it together with duct tape. It's not going to hold air. You can't go out onto a lake with it. But if you hook up or reverse a vacuum to it, it'll blow up into the shape, and you get a sense of like, oh, I like that. I don't like that. Let's add a little bit here. Let's take a little bit there. And then you just start working from there. And that's right. Really kind of what happened. And then once we had the basic idea, then we moved to actual fabric and starting to join that together.
I think it's something that it's really hard to put into words, like how much tinkering, how much R&D goes into each one of these boats. Like, and not to go down too many rabbit holes, but one of the things that came out of the interview from Roman Dial, which I thought was really cool, was like when he talked about, for those of you that are familiar with the boats themselves, there's essentially a T-zip in the back of the boat, and that T-zip allows you to put things inside the boat, which creates more inflation. And what it ultimately did was it keeps the boats down. And he had a line that basically was like, when Sheri put the T-zip in, that ultimately created a better boat because it kept weight down, but it made the boat universal. And that's what I think is kind of leads us into another topic to discuss, which is this evolution of the sport, the evolution of the craft. And there is like 60 years of design genius that goes into these boats. And can we talk a little bit about the evolution of the sport, I guess, and also the craft that kind of gone hand in hand, what you can do with these things now?
Yeah, and if you look back, like when Alpacka started, that's 2000. We built our first boat in the fall of 2000. We started actually selling them in the summer of 2002. Got about 18 months in there where we were actively working on design. We had workable boats in the field, but we weren't selling them except to a handful of people. We didn't sell very many boats for close to a decade. We'd sell 100 to a couple hundred a year, which was fun, but it's hardly a successful business that you can rely on. And so in those early years, the only people that were finding us were the people that needed the boat to do the same types of trips that I was doing, which isn't a huge population of people out there. And that's what they were good for. They were great for that kind of activity, but not everybody wants to go do that style of a trip and go out and do a big long backpacking trip in Alaska and get really cold and kind of do that stuff. Like, people like doing fun trips and they like doing river trips, and they like doing traditional pack raft trips. But those first decade of Alpacka rafts, even though they're durable enough and way better than anything that are on the market, it wasn't easy for a general backpacker to just go buy one of these things and go do a trip. You had to be committed to it. Well, as kind of you mentioned Roman, right around that 2010 to 2012 mark, we came out with the extended sterns, which made the boat much more trim on the water and it made it track much better. We came out with the whitewater deck that made the boat much more dry and warm. And then we came out with the cargo fly T-zip in the stern. So you put your gear inside the boat. Suddenly, a pack raft wasn't just like this unique little thing that was the only thing that would work for a certain kind of trip, but wasn't necessarily used for all kinds of trips. To suddenly, a pack raft was a boat that you could take on almost any river trip anywhere and have a good time. You could do traditional river trips like Middle Fork of the Salmon and Grand Canyon and the Yampa and all these other what we think of as traditional river trips, but on top of doing all the big Alaska trips. And then the Alaska trips themselves were warmer, drier, more comfortable, and suddenly pack rafting really started to grow because people saw it as a really fun and easy way to get on backcountry rivers, rather than this necessity that if you want to traverse land in Alaska, you need one of these. Was like, I want one of these.
So for those folks out there who have never pack rafted, they have trips that they want to do and have in mind, what would you suggest to those folks that are getting into pack rafting or are curious about the sport?
Well, if you're curious about it or you've never seen it before and you don't understand why it might be something you're interested or not, I think there's really two ways to look at pack rafting. One is, if you're already into backpacking and going out into the backcountry, and doing trips out there, then a pack raft is just an additional way to have that experience that can help like increase the how much of an experience you have. And it's essential in a place like Alaska or northern Canada, where you cannot go very far without needing to use or cross a waterway. In the lower 48, that's much less true. You can go on backpacking trips all over the lower 48. You can walk north to south on 3 huge trails all the way through the country. But if you get a pack raft, even in the lower 48, you can still end up suddenly being like, oh, there's this really cool lake that I've been to. It'd be awesome to go paddle around in there. Or there's this backcountry small stream or river that I've seen it before. I think that will be floatable. And then the pack raft kind of helps you expand what you can do in the backcountry. And so for a lot of people, I think that's one way to like get into the sport, is to think about it as a kind of additional piece that you can add to your backcountry travel gear that allows you to do different things, that maybe gets away for some people or has some different experiences. The whole other side to it is just getting into water sports. A lot of new pack rafters, it's actually the first time they're also new to water sports in general. And I think water sports are great. I think all kinds of water sports are fun. I personally own multiple whitewater kayaks. I like regular rafting. Going out on SUPs is fun. So I don't think of pack rafting as like the only way to experience a water sport, but it's a really beginner friendly, easy to paddle, lightweight way to get into water sports. You don't have to go out and paddle class 3, class 4, harder than that. You can go out, get on a local river, get in a pack raft, and just paddle down and have fun. And it's a great way to get out there, and it doesn't take up a lot of space in your house. Doesn't take up a lot of space in your car, and they're really easy to paddle. And so I think that's a big thing for a lot of people getting into water sports, because I think water sports are in general more intimidating than a lot of other sports, especially if you don't already have experience in them. Rivers in particular can be fast and scary, and a pack raft, you don't have to go out and do a wild and crazy river. You can go out and get on your local river that's just got a nice flow through town, and people send us pictures all the time of just doing like what we would call the local town run. That's not even a lot of whitewater, but just different way to see town.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that's super special about the boat. For instance, we took some friends out recently, and we supped, and then we put my friend's father, who's 70, in a pack raft, and he felt much more comfortable. There wasn't any major water, and it just allowed him to like really enjoy. And in fact, he had his little itty bitty dog with him too, like a purse dog. And I thought to myself, I was like, this is so perfect, because we were supping and then jumping on the rocks and climbing and what have you, and there's no way he was going to do that. For hardcore kayakers or people that are really into kayaking, on that flip side of this, what would you suggest if they were interested in trying a pack raft?
And I think that's an interesting other side of things, is that it kind of depends on your perspective of how you're looking at the sport, because I think some people that are new will look at pack rafting and think, oh, they might see videos of people doing big trips or doing hard whitewater, and they're like, that's not for me. But pack rafting is this really friendly sport. You almost get the exact opposite when you roll into the whitewater kayaking crowd, and that it's taken a long time for them to realize kind of how pack rafting fits into their life, because they see pack rafts as slow and ponderous and not nearly as capable as a whitewater kayak. And that's true. Even with the Valkyrie, which is incredibly capable, it is not as good as a whitewater kayak, but fits in a backpack. You can travel with it. You can get into remote waterways, and you can do all these things. And it's still pretty darn fun and awesome to paddle. And more often than not, you get whitewater kayakers that jump into a pack raft expecting to not like it at all. And they're like, wow, this boat's really handles nice. It handles like a kayak. It's not not a kayak, but it handles like one. I can do the same paddle strokes and the same techniques that I use in my kayak, I can use in this pack raft, and I'll get a similar result. Maybe not as high performance, but I'll get a similar result. And, and the Valkyrie is like that, ever inching closer to true kayak performance.
I love that the fact that there's that full arc. You can go from, my friend's father is 70 and getting him out with us, in a pretty unaccessible place otherwise, to somebody like my office mate who wants to paddle harder water. And I think that's cool. It's like gives an opportunity. Do you have any favorite pack rafting stories or adventure stories from some of the 20 plus years that you've been out there messing around with these boats and adventuring?
I actually just wrote a foreword to a pack raft guidebook, which is a little funny to be writing, this intro to a pack raft guidebook, because I'm like, wow, we're at the point where there's actually going to be a guidebook for pack rafting now, and not just a how to pack raft, but like a guidebook for various different trips and where to go and what to do. And I got into the sport because I really liked the idea of being able to just go point A to point B and see what's out there and draw lines on the map. I love that experience of not knowing what you're going to run into and just going out and traversing landscape. And I've had some really cool things happen there where sometimes you end up in a situation, you can get yourself in trouble if you don't know what you're doing, but you can also end up in like some of the like wildest experiences that you couldn't imagine could happen to you. And I remember in 2015, my wife and I were in New Zealand, and we'd heard about this trip. We knew roughly where to go, but nothing else. And we walked in off a road, backcountry river, descended probably 2,000 feet down like steep New Zealand bush, on like a stoat trappers trail, like where they trap the little weasels that kill the native birds. But it was like, you're like following like little flagging markers through the woods, not sure if we get into this gorge, and we knew the trip had been done, so we knew it was possible. But we get down into this gorge, and it is a narrow, tight gorge. And at one point, we just ended up fully cliffed out with like a 15 or 20 foot waterfall. And my wife does not like to jump off things. She's super adventurous, but the idea of jumping into water is not her favorite thing. And I'm like, well, we're stuck here. We got to go, and because it was getting dark, just having those kinds of experiences was totally wild, but it ended up being totally amazing. Jumped into this threw the boat in, jumped in after it in this big, deep pool of water. And then about a half mile later, we were out of the gorge and camped on a beautiful beach. And, those kinds of experiences, I had no idea it was there. Still could, I can only describe it, but once you get kind of like off the beaten path and just go out, you sometimes run into some stuff that's a little not as pleasant, and you're walking through muck for a couple of miles, but sometimes you end up in a place like that where you go through this beautiful gorge and end up at just a stunner campsite that only a couple people have ever been to.
The pack raft does is it's a great tool to help us get out there and explore and have those kinds of experiences, which is one of the things I love about it.
You really don't know where life is going to take you, and I think you get told that when you're a kid and you don't really understand it, and then as you get older you kind of see it, and you look at the film and look where it's taken Sheri through her life, and just like a desire to make her own clothing in Phoenix in the 1950s leads her to Jackson Hole and then to Alaska, and then to start a business that essentially kind of changes how we use the backcountry. And I didn't expect, when I did these trips, to have that take me to living in Southern Colorado and essentially running a company that's manufacturing. I didn't study manufacturing in college. I didn't know any of that stuff, but that's what I'm doing these days. And it's funny how life takes you where you don't plan for it. But if you can sit back and enjoy things and, you know, take the best of what it gets you, you can go some very cool places.
Absolutely. And I would love to just really quickly talk a little bit when about the factory and the fact, you know, you all employ over 50 people, livable wage in a small town in southern Colorado. And so if I'm going to order a boat, for instance, what is the process like? What's happening behind the scenes? Like, can we pull the curtain back a little bit on what Alpacka is and how it operates in the small town of Mancos, Colorado?
Yeah, you know, it's I'd love for the whole world to operate the way we do. I think I'm smart enough to know that the whole world can't necessarily operate that way, but I'm pretty proud of it. You know, we're a build to order factory. We've got 50 people here making boats every day. You know, it's a really fun and friendly. It's still factory work. I'll tell even new staff that, but we do our best to make it a fun and friendly place to work. Like, employees get control largely over their own schedule. They come to work when they want, they leave when they want. They can take, you know, that they've got if their kids have a game in the middle of the day, they just go to that game and they come back later and get their work done. And we try to have a really like low key environment, even though we're all working really hard together. But so when people order a boat, since it's made to order, just think of a restaurant. We don't have boats sitting on the shelf. We make each individual boat for the person that ordered it, and we kind of have a process for that. And you know, we've kind of figured out our own way, and it's ended up being a lot of fun. It's stressful at times, for sure. I don't think there's a business owner in the world that doesn't experience heartburn and stress over anything and everything. But you know, it's pretty cool to be able to not just to design it like Sheri does, but to actually then make it. So we don't send it away and then just have them come back and then we ship them out. Like, we get the hands on through the entire manufacturing process, which is something that I really, really enjoy. It can wear you out, but it's pretty cool to see.
Yeah. Speaking from experience of spending quite a few days filming at the factory and, you know, at the shop with everybody, the thing that, outside of watching people come in and out as they please, watching everything being made by hand, I would say one of my favorite aspects of the shop is the fact that there's almost as many dogs as employees. And I think that is also something that's really special about Alpacka and the way that the business is run. It's very friendly and dog friendly, and I love that aspect of it. And I think with that, we should probably call it an end of a fireside chat. I personally am bummed that we are not literally at a fireside chat in the beautiful Nevada City and Grass Valley. But as somebody who's been lucky enough to have films in the festival for the last 10 years, and actually even meeting you and Sarah at the festival how many years ago, becoming friends there. You know, thank you, Wild and Scenic, for having us and for everything that you all do. Yeah.
No, definitely. It was I totally understand, and it makes a lot of sense of why we weren't able to have an in-person event this year, but I'm looking forward to coming back, because my wife and I have been to 2 of in-person at Wild and Scenic in Grass Valley and Nevada City, and just had a great time. So looking forward to that in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with that, thank you all, and I hope you will enjoy watching Sheri through the virtual festival, and we look forward to 2023. It's as crazy as that is to say, to be there in person.
Definitely. Thanks,
All right,
you.
Thank you.
All right.
Cheers, guys.